A wrought iron gate at the end of a quiet West Virginia lane. Beyond it, a Victorian mansion looms 3 stories tall, its octagonal tower swallowed by ivy. Latin words arch across the gate. Music heals what time has broken. Closer, the porch sags, the windows are boarded, the paint has peeled to bare wood. 62 years of silence press against the walls like something waiting to be released. Inside the foyer, dust catches the light. A staircase rises into shadow, and at the very end of the 3rd floor hallway, a wall that does not match the rest of the house. Closer still, a young woman places her palm flat against the plaster. She is 19 years old. She has $217 to her name. She has just paid $12 for everything behind that wall. She does not know yet. Behind the plaster, something has been waiting for her. Something her grandmother sealed away in 1964. Briar Kavanaugh was 19 years old when she bought a haunted Victorian mansion for $12. She had $217 to her name, a violin she could barely play, and a letter from her dead grandmother that said, "Go east, baby girl. There is something there that belongs to our family." This is what she found. The morning Roisin Kavanaugh died, the rain didn't fall. It hovered, suspended in the gray West Virginia sky, like the whole sky was holding its breath. And Briar Kavanaugh stood at the kitchen window, watching, waiting for something to drop. Something always drops. Her grandmother's coffee cup sat on the counter, half full, still warm an hour ago, now cold, like everything else in the house. Briar was 19 years old, and the only person in the world who had ever truly loved her was upstairs in a bed she would never leave again. Her grandmother, her gran, the woman who had picked her up from the social worker's office 15 years ago with arthritic hands and a voice like worn velvet, and said, "Come on, baby girl, let's go home." Home. That word meant something then. Briar pressed her forehead against the cold glass. Outside the maple tree Gran had planted the year Briar's parents died was losing its last red leaves. October was ending. So was everything else. The hospice nurse came down the stairs, quiet, careful, like the floorboards themselves were grieving. "Honey?" The nurse's hand on Briar's shoulder was warm. Briar didn't turn. "She's gone. 3 days. 3 days. That's how long it took for the world to come apart. Day 1 was the funeral. Small, plain, the way Gran would have wanted. Briar wore Gran's navy dress because she had nothing black that fit. Reverend Holmes spoke about a woman who had taught violin to half the children in Hickory Ridge for 40 years, about hands gnarled with arthritis that still found ways to make music, about a love that crossed 2 generations. Briar didn't cry. She couldn't. Tears require breath, and Briar had been holding hers for so long she'd forgotten how to exhale. Day 2 was the lawyer's office. Briar wore the same navy dress because she didn't own another. She sat in a leather chair across from a man named Mr. Pembroke, who shuffled papers and avoided her eyes. "Your grandmother's estate," he began, then stopped, started again. "There's a complication." The door opened, and Owen Kavanaugh walked in. Owen, Gran's younger brother. The Uncle Briar had met exactly twice in her entire life. Once at her grandfather's funeral when she was 6, once at Christmas when she was 11, and Gran had made him leave by the salad course because of something he said about Briar's mother. Behind him, Maura, his wife, a woman with hair the color of bleached bone and a smile like a paper cut. "Briar." Owen sat down, didn't look at her. "We need to talk about the house." "What about it?" "It's mine." The room tilted. Briar opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. What did you just say? Owen slid a document across the table. Mora watched. Mr. Pembroke wouldn't meet Briar's eyes. Your grandmother and I had an arrangement, a previous will, from before she took you in. Owen's voice was the voice of a man who had practiced this. She left the house to me. The legal documentation is here. The recent will she made naming you was never properly filed. That's a lie. Briar. That's a lie. Her voice cracked. Gran told me. Gran told me the house was mine. She told me. Mora leaned forward. Her perfume smelled like funeral flowers. Honey. That word. From this woman. Honey, this isn't personal. But your grandmother was not in her right mind at the end. Family is family. We have a legal obligation. You haven't seen her in 8 years. That doesn't change the law. Briar looked at Mr. Pembroke, the man she had known her whole life, her grandmother's lawyer, her grandmother's friend. He looked at his desk. Mr. Pembroke. He looked at his desk. Mr. Pembroke. Nothing. And Briar understood, just like that, without anyone saying it. She understood that the world wasn't fair, that the people who promised wouldn't always show up, that her grandmother was 3 days gone and the wolves were already at the door. She stood up. Her knees were water. She walked out. Day 3 was eviction day. Owen and Mora arrived at 7 in the morning with a U-Haul. Briar was sitting on the porch in Gran's old sweater, watching the sun come up through the maples when she heard the truck. She didn't move. You have until noon. Owen wouldn't come close. He stayed by the truck. Mora was already inside, opening cabinets like she'd done it 1,000 times in her head. Take what's yours. Personal items only. The furniture stays. The furniture stays. Gran's piano, Gran's books, Gran's quilts. The kitchen table where Briar had eaten cereal every morning for 15 years. The reading chair by the window, the grandfather clock that chimed every quarter hour, even at 3 a.m. when Briar had nightmares and crept downstairs and curled up in Gran's lap. The furniture stays. Briar walked upstairs. She packed one suitcase. She emptied her savings account on her phone. $217, the remains of her summer waitressing money. The college fund had gone to Gran's medical bills. The medical bills had gone to a stroke that took 5 years to finish what it started. $217. She walked into Gran's bedroom. The bed was still unmade. Briar smoothed the quilt Gran had stitched the year Briar started high school. Tiny irises, Briar's favorite flower. On the nightstand, Gran's violin case. The violin Gran could no longer play because her fingers wouldn't bend. The violin she had handed to Briar on her 16th birthday and said, "When my hands stopped, I thought the music stopped, but the music was never in the hands, baby girl. The music was in the listening." Briar took the violin. She kissed the door frame of Gran's room. She walked out without looking back, because if she looked back, she would not be able to leave, and if she did not leave, she would die in this house. Not from grief, from the part of grief that comes after grief, the part nobody warns you about, the part where you realize that nobody is coming. Nobody is coming. She drove east. She didn't choose east on purpose. West was where her uncle had a hunting cabin she could never go to. North was where her mother was buried in a cemetery she could not afford to visit. South was where her grandfather had died in a Korean war she had only read about in history class. So east. East was the direction of nothing. Briar drove for 4 hours through hollows and ridges and small towns that all looked like they'd given up on themselves. The Buick was older than she was. The radio crackled in and out of stations. a country song about a woman leaving a man, a preacher warning about the last days. Static, static, static. She didn't cry. She still didn't cry. She passed a sign that said, "Welcome to Millbrook Hollow Pop, 1847. The population number had been painted over twice. Once 2,400, once 2,100, now 1,847. A town counting down. The gas station was closed. The diner was closed. Everything was closed except for a small storefront with a hand-painted sign. The brass kettle coffee pie conversation. Briar pulled into the gravel lot. Her knees almost didn't hold her up when she got out of the car. She had not eaten since yesterday. She had not slept since the day before. She had $217, a violin she could barely play, and a suitcase that contained her entire life folded into the corners. The bell over the door rang. The man behind the counter was 68 years old, with a beard the color of late winter snow and hands that had clearly built things. He looked up, and he froze. He froze. For 3 full seconds, this stranger looked at Briar like he had seen a ghost. "My God," his voice was a whisper. "You're Roisin's girl." Briar's heart stopped. "What did you say?" "You're Roisin Kavanagh's granddaughter." He came around the counter, his hand at his chest, like he needed to make sure his heart was still beating. "I'd know those eyes anywhere. Sit down. Please, sit down." "How do you—" "Sit down, honey. Sit down before you fall." She sat. He brought her coffee in a mug that said, "World's okayest grandpa." He brought her pie, apple, still warm, cinnamon and brown sugar and butter that melted on her tongue and broke something open inside her. She ate. She ate like she had not eaten in a year. He watched her eat, quiet, patient, like he knew that some hungers cannot be rushed. When she finished, he sat down across from her. "My name is Mercer Tilden. I knew your grandmother when she was 16 years old. I knew her better than anyone in this town. And the fact that you are sitting in my coffee shop on this particular morning is the closest thing to a miracle I've ever seen." Briar set down her fork. "My grandmother died 4 days ago." Mercer Tilden closed his eyes. He closed his eyes and held them closed for a long moment. When he opened them, they were wet. "I'm so sorry, baby girl." That phrase, baby girl, the exact phrase Gran had used for 15 years, every day, every night, every time Briar skinned her knee or failed a test or cried over a boy. "Baby girl, you're gonna be all right." Briar broke, not loud, not dramatic, just the slow, silent kind of breaking that happens when a dam that has held for too long finally gives way. The tears came, the breath came, the grief came, and Mercer Tilden, who had been a stranger 10 minutes ago, slid a clean napkin across the table and waited. He waited the way Gran would have waited. After a long time, Briar said, "She left me a letter." "Did she?" "In the lining of her violin case. I found it last night when I was packing. She must have hidden it years ago. Years." Mercer's hands gripped the edge of the table. "What did the letter say?" Briar reached into her suitcase. The envelope was yellowed. The handwriting was Gran's. Briar unfolded it for what must have been the 100th time. Her hand shook. "If one day you have to leave baby girl, go east. Find Millbrook Hollow. Find 14 Hawthorne Lane. There is something there that belongs to our family. Something I should have given you sooner. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Mercer did not speak for a full minute. Then he stood up. He walked to the window. He looked out at the gray morning. He pressed his palm against the glass like he was trying to feel something on the other side. Mr. Tilden, Mercer, just Mercer. What is 14 Hawthorne Lane? He didn't turn around. When he spoke, his voice was the voice of a man uncovering something he had buried a long time ago. It's the Ashby house. It's been empty for 62 years. People in this town call it haunted. Children dare each other to walk past it. The county has tried to auction it off 3 times. Nobody will touch it. He turned around. His eyes were on Briar's. Your grandmother used to spend every afternoon there, from the time she was 12 until the day she left this town and never came back. She was the best student Philomena Ashby ever had, and what happened in that house in 1964 is the reason this town stopped trusting anything beautiful. Briar's hand went to her throat. Philomena Ashby. You don't know that name. No. Mercer shook his head slowly, the kind of slow that meant he was watching 60 years of silence finally end. Your grandmother never told you. She never told me anything. He came back to the table. He sat down. He folded his hands the way old men do when they are about to tell a story that they have carried alone for too long. Then you and I, baby girl, are going to fix that. The flyer was on the bulletin board by the bathroom. Briar saw it on her way out. She had stood up to go. She didn't know where. She didn't know how. She just knew she could not sit in that coffee shop one more minute without breaking again. So she walked toward the door, and the flyer caught her eye. Caulfield County Tax Auction, 13 properties, this Saturday, 10 a.m. She read down the list. Her eyes moved automatically, the way her grandmother had taught her to read music, top to bottom, left to right, until she saw it. 14 Hawthorne Lane, Victorian, circa 1887, condemned, starting bid, $12. $12 for the house in her grandmother's letter. $12 for the house Mercer had just told her was haunted. $12 for the house where Roisin Kavanaugh had become whoever she had become before she became the woman who raised Briar. Briar stared at the flyer. The bell over the door rang. Mercer was beside her. He looked at the flyer. He looked at her. He looked at the flyer. Baby girl, Mr. Tilden, Mercer, I don't have anywhere else to go. He was quiet a long time. I know, $12. I know. I have $217 to my name. I have a suitcase. I have a violin I can barely play. And my grandmother told me to come here. She told me. She wrote it down. Mercer Tilden put his hand on her shoulder. His hand was steady, the way Gran's hand had been steady before the arthritis came and stole the steadiness away. Then on Saturday morning, baby girl, we go to the auction. Saturday morning came too slowly and too fast. Briar slept 2 nights in her car in the parking lot behind the brass kettle. Mercer offered her the apartment above the coffee shop, but she couldn't. She couldn't accept that kind of kindness from a stranger. Not yet. Not while she was still this raw. But every morning at 6, Mercer unlocked the back door and left a thermos of coffee and a wax paper bag of food on the step. Every morning. Saturday morning was different. Saturday morning, there was a folded note tucked under the thermos. County Courthouse, 8:30. Wear something that makes you feel like Roisin's granddaughter. M. Briar didn't have anything like that, but she had Gran's navy dress and Gran's wool coat and the little gold cross Gran had worn every day of her life that the hospice nurse had pressed into Briar's palm right before they took the body away. Briar put the cross around her neck. She brushed her hair until it shone. She drove to the courthouse with hands that would not stop trembling. The county courthouse smelled like floor wax and burnt coffee. About 40 people sat in metal folding chairs, old men in feed caps, younger men in flannel, a few couples, a landlord from 2 counties over with a clipboard. The auctioneer was a woman in a gray blazer with reading glasses on a chain. Mercer was already there. He had saved Breyer a chair. He stood when she came in, squeezed her hand, said nothing. The auction started. The empty lots went first, then the smaller houses. The crowd was bored. People shifted in their seats. A baby cried in the back. Then, item number 11, 14 Hawthorne Lane. The room went still, not silent, still, like a hush had been waiting for this moment for 62 years. The auctioneer read the description in a flat voice. Victorian residence, approximately 5,000 square feet, 3 stories plus an octagonal tower, condemned by the county in 1964, no utilities, no water, foundation status unknown. She paused, looked up over her reading glasses. Starting bid is $12. A man in the second row laughed. That's the Ashby place. People laughed. A woman with a cane said, I wouldn't take that house if you paid me $12. More laughter. The auctioneer waited. She had done this 3 times before. She knew what was about to happen. She picked up her pen to mark it unsold. Breyer raised her hand. The laughter stopped. 40 heads turned, 40 pairs of eyes. The woman with the cane sucked in a breath. The man in the feed cap muttered something. The landlord with the clipboard shifted forward in his chair. $12. Breyer's voice was small, but it was hers. I bid $12. The auctioneer raised her eyebrows. Young lady, do you understand? Yes, ma'am. This property is condemned. There is no water, no electric. The roof status is unknown. You will need a structural engineer's certification to even apply for utilities. I understand. And you are how old? 19. A murmur went through the crowd. The auctioneer looked at the back of the room. The auctioneer looked at her clipboard. The auctioneer looked at Breyer. $12 from the young woman in the third row. Going once. 500. The voice came from the back. Breyer's head whipped around. The man standing in the doorway was tall, mid-50s, charcoal suit, watch that cost more than Breyer's car. He held a leather portfolio. He did not smile. $500. His voice carried. Cash. The auctioneer blinked. Sir, may I have your Hollis Vandermeer? He walked down the aisle, slow, deliberate, like a man who had practiced this entrance. I am the great-nephew of Philomena Ashby. I am bidding on my family's property. The room exploded into whispers. Mercer's hand closed around Breyer's wrist. His grip was iron. Don't, he whispered. Don't react. Don't let him see your face. But Breyer's face was already showing it. $500. She had 217. Hollis Vandermeer did not look at her. He looked at the auctioneer. I trust we can dispense with the formalities. The auctioneer hesitated. She looked at her clipboard. She looked at Breyer. She looked at Hollis Vandermeer. She looked at the woman in the back of the room. Breyer had not noticed her before. The woman was small, late 70s, hair the color of birch bark pulled into a tight bun. She wore a heavy wool sweater and held a leather-bound book on her lap. She had been sitting silently in the back row since the auction started. The auctioneer's voice was careful. Mr. Vandermeer, there is a complication. There is no complication. There is, sir. Mrs. Crenshaw has been our county records keeper for 51 years, and she has just signaled to me that she has something to bring before the court. The woman in the back stood up. She was small, barely 5 feet tall, But when she walked down the center aisle of that courthouse, the room parted for her like she was a queen. She stopped at the auctioneer's table. She opened her leather book. She found a page. She put her finger on it. For the record, her voice was thin, but it carried. I am Loretta Crenshaw, custodian of the Caulfield County Deed Registry. I have been the custodian for 51 years, and I have something to read. She turned to face the room. She read aloud, Last Will and Testament of Philomena Annette Ashby, filed November the 3rd, 1963, Section 7, Paragraph 4. It is my express wish that should the property at 14 Hawthorne Lane ever come available for public sale, any direct descendant of any of my registered piano students shall hold a right of first refusal at the minimum stated price. This clause shall remain binding in perpetuity regardless of any contrary claims by my biological relatives. The room was silent. Loretta Crenshaw closed her book. She turned toward Briar. Miss Kavanaugh, your grandmother Rose Sheen was a registered student of Philomena Ashby from August of 1960 to October of 1964. Her name is recorded in the official student ledger that I have kept in this office for half a century. You are her direct descendant. The right of first refusal is yours. Your bid of $12 stands. Briar could not breathe. Hollis Vandermeer's face turned the color of cold ash. That is absurd. That is the law, Mr. Vandermeer. I notarized this will myself in 1963. I was 22 years old. I have waited 62 years for someone to walk through that courthouse door and claim it. I will contest this. You may try. This is theft. This is the will of your great aunt, a woman you never met, a woman your family disowned, a woman who anticipated this exact moment and made provision against it. Loretta Crenshaw's voice did not rise, but it cut. You are welcome to bring your lawyers, Mr. Vandermeer. I will be waiting in my office. Hollis stood very still. He turned. He looked at Briar. He looked at her like she was something he had stepped in on the way to a meeting he could not afford to miss. You don't know, he said quietly, what you have just inherited. Then he walked out. The auctioneer brought down her gavel. Sold, 14 Hawthorne Lane, $12, to Miss Briar Kavanaugh of Hickory Ridge, West Virginia. The room erupted, not in applause, in a confused low murmur that swept through the rows like wind through tall grass. People stood up. People sat down. People stared at Briar like they didn't know whether to congratulate her or run from her. Briar didn't move. She couldn't. Loretta Crenshaw walked up the aisle. She stopped beside Briar's chair. She put a small papery hand on Briar's cheek. Your grandmother was the best of us, child. Her eyes were wet. She was the best of all of us. I have prayed every night for 62 years that her blood would come back. And here you are. She walked away. Mercer was crying. Briar realized she was crying too. She had not even paid the $12 yet. The house was at the end of Hawthorne Lane. The street rose gently up a wooded hill. Maples and old oaks lined both sides. Every other house on the street was small, well-kept, lived in. Porch lights, pumpkins on the steps, a dog barking somewhere behind a fence. And then, at the very end of the lane, a wrought iron gate, tall, rusted, the Latin words still legible in the iron filigree at the top. Musica sonat quod tempus frangit. Music heals what time has broken. Mercer translated without being asked. She had it forged in Pittsburgh in 1948. Briar stepped out of the car. The house rose behind the gate, 3 stories, a wraparound porch sagging on the left, an octagonal tower on the southeast corner with a copper roof that had gone green with age, windows boarded over, paint stripped to bare wood in long curling tongues. A wisteria vine had climbed the porch column and consumed half the front facade. It was the most beautiful, most terrible thing Briar had ever seen. It looked like a building that had been waiting. She put her hand on the gate. The gate opened. It did not creak. It did not resist. It opened like it had been hoping someone would push it for 62 years. She walked up the cracked stone path. The key fit the front door after some persuading. The lock was rusted, but the mechanism turned. The door swung inward, and the smell came first. Dust, old wood, a faint sweet undernote that might have been dried lavender or dried roses or some other thing that had once been alive. Briar stepped inside. The foyer was dark. She found a window. She forced the shutter open. Sunlight fell across a hardwood floor, buried under decades of dust. A staircase rose along the left wall, solid oak, the banister carved with grape leaves. Straight ahead, a parlor with a bay window. To the right, a dining room with a stone fireplace. Above the fireplace, framed and dust-covered, was a portrait. A woman, late 40s, dark hair pulled back, a long throat, eyes that knew things. She was seated at a piano, her hands resting lightly on the keys, looking directly into the camera with an expression that was half amusement and half challenge. Mercer came in behind Briar. "That's her. That's Philomena Ashby." Briar walked closer. She looked at the woman in the portrait. She looked at the hands on the piano keys. Long fingers, a pianist's fingers, the kind of hands that could make 153 notes per minute sound like a single perfect breath. She looked at the woman's face, and then she looked at her own reflection in the dusty glass of the picture frame, the dark hair, the long throat, the eyes that knew things. Briar took a step back. "Mercer, I see it. Mercer, why do I don't know yet, baby girl, but your grandmother had her secrets, and this house knows all of them." That night, Briar slept in the parlor. Mercer had brought a sleeping bag from his apartment above the coffee shop. He had brought a battery lantern. He had brought a thermos of soup. He had asked 4 times if Briar wanted to spend the night above the brass kettle instead. 4 times she had said no. She needed to be in this house. She did not know why. She only knew that her grandmother had spent every afternoon of her teenage life inside these walls, and Briar needed to feel what Gran had felt, even if it took all night. The house breathed around her. That's what Mercer had said when she asked about the noises. Old houses breathe, baby girl. They contract at night when the temperature drops. The wood remembers everything it ever was. Don't be afraid of the noises. Be afraid only when the noises stop. Briar lay on her sleeping bag. The lantern made a small circle of warm light on the parlor floor. She thought about her grandmother at 16, walking up Hawthorne Lane, climbing those porch steps, pushing open the same front door, calling out for a teacher who saw something in her, a teacher who taught her something that mattered enough to write into a will. Briar thought about her grandmother at 78, dying in a small upstairs bedroom in Hickory Ridge, never having mentioned Millbrook Hollow, never having mentioned Philomena Ashby, never having mentioned a house with a wrought iron gate and Latin in the filigree. What did you do, Gran? What happened to you here? The grandfather clock in the dining room had stopped 62 years ago, so Briar didn't know what time it was when the music started. She only knew that one moment the house was silent, and the next moment there was a piano playing somewhere above her head. She sat up, slow, so slow. The music was faint, thread-like, like someone had taken a melody and pulled it through a needle's eye. It was a melody Briar did not recognize, but it was a melody she felt she should recognize, like a name she had been about to remember and had lost. She stood, she took the lantern, she walked to the staircase. The music continued. Above her, higher up, she climbed. The second floor was a long hallway with 4 bedrooms. The music did not come from here, it came from higher. From the 3rd floor, the narrow staircase tucked behind the linen closet door. She climbed. The 3rd floor was small. 2 doors on the right side, both empty. Servants' quarters from the original construction, Mercer had said. But the music came from the end of the hallway. There was a wall there, a wall where there should have been more rooms, a wall that did not match the rest of the house. The baseboard was pine instead of oak. The wallpaper was almost the same as the hallway pattern. Almost. Briar walked toward the wall. The music grew louder. She reached out. She placed her palm flat against the plaster. The music stopped. It stopped so abruptly that Briar nearly lost her balance. The silence rushed in like water, heavy, loud, the kind of silence that has been waiting to be silent for a very long time. She stood there with her hand on the wall. Her heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her throat. And then she heard very faintly on the other side of the wall, just once, just enough to be sure, the soft, deliberate, unmistakable sound of someone setting down a piano lid. Briar pulled her hand back. She backed up the hallway. She backed down the staircase. She did not breathe until she reached the parlor. When she did breathe, she breathed in a sound so close to a sob it might have been a laugh. She did not sleep. She sat in the bay window and watched the sky turn from black to charcoal to gray to pale gold. At sunrise, there was a knock at the front door, a small one, polite. Briar opened it. A girl was standing on the porch, 12 years old, maybe 13, red hair in 2 braids, a backpack with a unicorn on it, a serious face, the kind of face that had been wearing serious for too long. "Hi," the girl's voice was steady. "I'm Aisling Brogan. I live 4 houses down. My grandma sent me with biscuits." She held up a wax paper bag. "She says you don't have to talk to me if you don't want to, but you should eat the biscuits while they're warm." Briar tried to smile. The smile came out crooked. "Thank you. That's very kind." Aisling Brogan did not move. She looked past Briar into the foyer. She looked at the dust. She looked at the staircase. She looked up, toward the 3rd floor. "My grandma said," Aisling's voice was matter-of-fact, "my grandma said this house has been waiting for the right person to come back." Briar's hand tightened on the door. "What did your grandma say?" "She said this house has been waiting." The girl's eyes were the gray-green of old river stones. "She said it's been waiting since 1964, and the music will play for whoever it's been waiting for, but only at night and only once." Briar stared at her. "Aisling, yeah. Did you hear music last night?" The girl tilted her head. "No, ma'am. I sleep with the window closed." Then she handed Briar the bag of biscuits. "I have to go to school. I can come back tomorrow, if you want." "I want." Aisling Brogan nodded. She walked down the porch steps. At the gate she paused. She turned around. She looked up at the 3rd floor windows, the boarded ones, the dusty ones, the ones that had not been opened in 62 years. "There's something behind a wall up there." Aisling Brogan said it like she was telling Briar the weather. "My grandma said, she said you'll find it. She said you'll know when." Then she walked away. Briar stood in the doorway with a bag of warm biscuits in her hand and a violin she could barely play upstairs and $12 worth of property unfolding around her like a riddle that had been holding its breath for 62 years. She looked up the staircase, toward the third floor, toward the wall, toward the music she had not imagined. She thought of her grandmother. She thought of Roisin Kavanagh at 16 years old climbing these same stairs. She thought of the letter. There is something there that belongs to our family, something I should have given you sooner. She thought of Hollis Vandermeer's voice. You don't know what you have just inherited. She thought of Loretta Crenshaw weeping in the courthouse. I have waited 62 years. She thought of Mercer Tilden's hands when he had first seen her, the way they had gone to his chest, the way he had whispered, "My God." She thought of the wall at the end of the third-floor hallway, and Briar Kavanagh, 19 years old, orphaned twice over, with $205 to her name and a house she had bought for $12, looked up the staircase of a Victorian mansion in a dying town in the West Virginia hills, and she said out loud to no one and to everyone, "I'm going to open you." The house breathed around her. The house had been waiting. The sun came up over Hawthorne Lane the morning after Aisling Brogan's biscuits, and Briar Kavanagh stood on the porch with a cup of cold coffee in her hand and a problem. The problem. She owned a house. She owned a 5,000 square foot Victorian mansion that had been condemned for 62 years. She owned a wall on the third floor that had played piano music at her in the middle of the night. She owned a portrait of a woman whose face matched her own, and she owned exactly $193 to her name because the auction cost $12, and the gas to get to the auction had cost something, and the night at the motel had cost something, and the granola bars from the gas station had cost something, and the pack of underwear from the dollar store had cost something, because Briar Kavanagh had left Hickory Ridge with one suitcase, and one suitcase did not contain enough underwear for a person to start over. So, $193, a condemned mansion, a wall that played piano, and a grandmother whose secrets were stacking up faster than Briar could count them. She needed a hammer, a chisel, a pry bar, and maybe a flashlight that wasn't the cracked one in her glove compartment. Briar walked down Hawthorne Lane. She walked past the houses Aisling had told her about. The Brogans at house number 10, the widow at number 8 who had not opened her shutters in 30 years, the young couple at number 6 with 2 preschoolers and a golden retriever, the blue house at number 4 with the porch swing. She walked past them all, and every single one of those houses watched her walk by, because Millbrook Hollow had only 1,847 people, and by sunrise, all of them knew there was a 19-year-old girl living at number 14, and every single one of them was waiting to see what she would do next. Sweeney's Hardware was on Main Street. The bell above the door was bright as a robin. The man behind the counter was 60 years old and built like a fence post that had been driven into the ground a long time ago. His hair was iron gray, his apron was canvas, his hands were the hands of a man who had handled every nail in the county at least once. "Morning, morning. Help you with something. I need a hammer. What kind?" "The kind that hits things." He smiled like a man who had not smiled in a while. "Got those." He walked her down an aisle. Slow, he pointed. 16-ounce claw, 20-ounce framing, ball peen, sledge, mallet. "What are you hitting?" Briar swallowed. "A wall." "What kind of wall?" "Plaster. Old." He nodded. He picked up the 16-ounce. He picked up a chisel. He picked up a pry bar. He picked up a coil of work gloves still wrapped in plastic. He carried them to the counter. He set them down. He punched numbers into his register. He looked at her. "You're the girl who bought the Ashby place." "Yes, sir." $12. "Yes, sir." He looked at her for a long time. He looked at her the way Mercer had looked at her, the way Loretta Crenshaw had looked at her, like she was a ghost, like she was a promise, like she was a delivery somebody had been expecting for a very long time and had given up on. He rang the total, $43.12. She reached for her wallet. He put his hand on hers. She froze. His hand was warm, dry, calloused, the hand of a grandfather. Not her grandfather, but a grandfather. "Put your money away." "I can pay." I said put it away. "Sir, my name is Podrick Sweeney. I went to high school with your grandmother. She loaned me $20 in 1962 so I could buy a pair of work boots for my first job. She told me to pay her back when I could. I never did, because I never saw her again. She left town that fall." He pushed the bag across the counter. "Take this hammer, baby girl. Consider us square." Briar's mouth opened. It closed. It opened. "Mr. Sweeney." "Podrick. Podrick, I can't." "You can, and you will, because if you don't take this hammer, I am going to spend the next 62 years owing Roisin Kavanagh $20. And I'm tired, and I'm old, and I would like to settle accounts before I go." She took the bag. Her hands were shaking. He came around the counter. He walked her to the door. He held the door for her. The bell over the door rang as she stepped through. "Baby girl." She turned around. "Whatever's behind that wall." His eyes were wet. "Whatever's behind it. Promise me you won't be afraid of it." "Why?" "Because your grandmother wasn't afraid of it, and she was the bravest person I ever met. And whatever's down there is part of why she was brave. So promise me." "I promise." He nodded. He let the door close behind her, and Briar walked back up Main Street toward Hawthorne Lane with a bag of tools she had not paid for and a knot in her chest the size of a grapefruit. She did not see the boy until she nearly walked into him. "Whoa, sorry, my fault. My fault? It's both our faults then." She looked up. The boy was tall, 21, brown hair that fell into his eyes, a canvas messenger bag across his chest, a roll of paper tucked under one arm, the kind of face that had freckles in summer and forgot to shave on Tuesdays. He was looking at her bag, the bag from Sweeney's Hardware. "You bought a hammer." "I bought several hammers." "From Podrick." "Yes. He doesn't sell hammers to just anyone. Apparently he does." "He really doesn't." She raised an eyebrow. "You are very interested in my hammers, sir." He laughed. He laughed like a person who had not laughed enough lately. Sorry. I'm Rhett Quincy. I'm studying architecture. Or I was. I'm taking a year off. I'm staying with my uncle a couple of streets over, and He pushed his hair out of his eyes. "I heard somebody bought the Ashby house. I heard it at the diner this morning, and I have spent 3 years trying to get inside that house. I tried to get the county to let me document it. I tried to get the Historical Society to let me photograph it. I wrote 3 different proposals. I wrote a senior thesis on it without ever setting foot inside. And then yesterday, a 19-year-old girl bought it for $12, and I have been losing my mind ever since." Briar blinked. She blinked twice. "You wrote a senior thesis on my house?" "Yes." "Without ever going inside?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because," he shifted the roll of paper under his arm, "because the architecture is impossible. The original blueprints don't match the footprint. The east side window placement violates standard Italianate Victorian load distribution principles, and there is a 60-foot discrepancy between the perimeter of the foundation and the visible dimensions of the first floor. Breyer stared at him. There is a what? A 60-foot discrepancy. In English, there is something inside that house that is not on the blueprints. There is space inside that house that the official records don't account for. There is approximately 600 square meters of building that doesn't legally exist. Breyer set the bag down, slowly. 600 square meters, roughly, of building that doesn't exist on paper, but it exists somewhere. She picked the bag back up. She started walking. Come on. Where? With me. Where with you? To my house, Rhett Quincy, the one you've been losing your mind over for 3 years. Come on. He followed her up Hawthorne Lane. He followed her like a man who was about to be either very disappointed or very, very astonished. The first thing he did when he stepped inside number 14 was put down his messenger bag and walk to the foyer wall and place his palm flat against it. He closed his eyes. He stayed like that for a long time. Rhett. Shh. You're touching my wall. Shh. She crossed her arms. She watched him. He walked slowly through the parlor. He touched the bay window. He touched the dining room door frame. He looked up at the portrait of Philomena Ashby above the fireplace. He froze for a moment. He kept walking. He went up the stairs. He came down the stairs. He went up again. He came down again. He stopped at the bottom of the staircase. He looked at her. Breyer. Yeah, there is a tower on the southeast corner. From the outside, it appears to be 3 stories tall. The interior of the tower on the 3rd floor accounts for approximately 2 of those stories. The first story of the tower is not accessible from inside the house. There is no door. There is no staircase. There is no access of any kind to whatever is inside the bottom of the tower. She felt her stomach drop. What does that mean? It means, he paused, it means somebody built this house to hide something, and the only way to find what they hid is to find the door they built in. Because there is a door, Breyer. There is always a door, and we are going to find it. She looked at the bag from Sweeney's Hardware. She looked at him. She handed him a hammer. Show me the wall. The 3rd floor hallway felt different in daylight. It felt longer. It felt narrower. The wallpaper Breyer had touched the night before was just wallpaper now. The plaster was just plaster. Until you looked closer, until you ran your finger along the baseboard and felt that the pine didn't match the oak in the rest of the house, until you tapped the wall and heard the hollow on the other side, until you stood there in the late morning light with a stranger you had just met and a hammer in your hand and realized you were about to find out what your grandmother had been hiding for 62 years. Rhett knelt down. He measured the baseboard. He nodded. He stood up. Ready? Yes. Are you sure? No. Good. He handed her the chisel. He took the hammer himself. He set the tip of the chisel against the plaster where the false wall met the original framing. He raised the hammer. He looked at her. Last chance. Hit it. He hit it. The crack was small. The next strike opened it wider. The next opened it wider still. Dust fell. Plaster fell. The wallpaper tore in long curling strips. Rhett worked methodically. Breyer worked beside him. They did not speak. They breathed. They struck. They breathed. Behind the plaster was lath. Behind the lath was a gap. And in the gap, Rhett shined his flashlight through the broken plaster. He inhaled. He inhaled so sharply Breyer felt the air shift in the hallway. What? Briar. What? There's a door. He stepped back. He let her look. She put her face to the broken plaster. She held the flashlight. She angled the beam. A door, a heavy oak door set into a frame of solid wood. The door was carved. The carving was of music notes, 5 staff lines, a treble clef, a bass clef, a series of quarter notes climbing a scale. The doorknob was tarnished brass. The keyhole was empty. Briar pulled her face back. She looked at Rhett. He looked at her. Okay. His voice was a whisper. Okay, okay, okay. They cleared the rest of the plaster. It took an hour. By the time they finished, Briar's arms were on fire, and her hair was white with dust, and the floor of the 3rd floor hallway was a graveyard of broken lath and plaster chunks. The door stood revealed. The carved notes climbed the oak in a melody Briar wished she could read. She ran her hand along the door frame. She ran her fingers across the top, across the lintel. Her fingers found something, small, cold, metal. She closed her hand around it. She held it up to the light. A key, a brass key dark with age, the bow shaped like a treble clef. Rhett swallowed. That was sitting up there for 62 years. 62 years. And nobody knew. Until today. She held the key. She did not put it in the lock yet. She stood in front of the door her grandmother had walked through hundreds of times. The door her grandmother had walked through and never spoken of. The door her grandmother had sealed up in 1964 and never come back to. She thought of Roisin in the hospice bed, eyes closing, hand reaching for Briar's. She thought of Roisin's last words, "Promise me you'll go east, baby girl." Briar slid the key into the lock. She turned it. The mechanism resisted. Then it gave. The click echoed in the dusty hallway. She pulled the door open. A rush of cool, dry air came out. Not stale, not dead, just quiet. The air of a place that had been sealed but not abandoned. The air of a place that had been kept. Behind the door was not a room. Behind the door was a staircase. A brass spiral staircase. Polished, beautiful, descending into the dark. Down, down, down. Below the foundation of the house. Below the earth. Briar's hand went to her throat. Rhett's hand went to his mouth. He spoke without taking his hand away. That doesn't exist. It exists. Briar, brass spiral staircases like that. They don't. They cost a fortune. In 1948, they would have cost. They would have cost. He couldn't finish. How deep does it go? I don't know. We're going down. Briar, Rhett. We don't know what's down there. We're going down. She took the first step. The brass was cold under her hand. The second step. The third. Rhett followed her. The flashlight beam danced in the curve of the staircase. The brass spiraled. The walls were paneled in dark wood, polished, cared for. The air grew cooler as they descended. Not colder, just cooler. The way a wine cellar is cool. The way a library archive is cool. She counted the steps. 21, 22, 23. At 24, the staircase opened. Briar stepped down. She stepped onto a floor of polished hardwood inlaid with brass. She lifted her flashlight, and the light went up, 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 because she was not standing in a basement. She was not standing in a cellar. She was standing in the doorway of a hall as big as a church. She found a switch on the wall beside her. It was old. It was the kind of switch with a small ceramic toggle. She did not know what would happen if she flipped it. She flipped it, and the room came to life. A chandelier above her bloomed amber, then a series of wall sconces, then accent lights set into the floor along the perimeter, then small bronze lamps over 5 different stations along the curved back wall. Briar's flashlight fell out of her hand. Rhett made a sound that was not a word. Above them, 50 feet above their heads, was a dome ceiling made of colored glass, stained glass, hundreds of pieces, thousands of pieces, arranged in patterns that when she looked closer, resolved themselves into music. Treble clefs, bass clefs, notes climbing, notes falling. The dome was a transcribed symphony rendered in red and gold and cobalt and emerald, a symphony in glass. Briar's knees gave out. Rhett caught her elbow. Stand up, stand up, stand up, Briar, stand up. You have to see this. He turned her around, slowly, slowly. The room was a half moon, curved walls. The flat side faced the staircase. The curve faced inward. 5 stations along the curve. 5 instruments. A Steinway grand, ebony, polished. A Bosendorfer, larger, imperial. A Bechstein upright German walnut carved with vines. A harpsichord, 18th century, French, gilt. The case painted with cherubs and birds. And at the far end of the curve against the wall, a small chamber organ, 28 copper pipes, black wood, bellows pedals. Along the back wall behind the harpsichord were cabinets, glass cabinets, tall ones, 12 feet high, floor to ceiling, 12 of them, and inside the cabinets, manuscripts, sheet music, hundreds of pages, hundreds, bound, loose, some yellowed, some white, all written by hand, all written by the same hand, the careful, deliberate hand Briar had seen on the letter that had led her here, the hand of Philomena Ashby. Briar walked. She walked because she could not stand still. She walked because if she stood still, she might drop. She walked toward the far wall, the wall behind the chamber organ, and as she got closer, she saw what was carved into the wall. Names carved into the dark wood paneling, names in neat, deliberate letters, names arranged in 2 columns, names with dates beside them. She counted. She did not have to count. She knew, but she counted anyway. 67 names. The names of the students. She moved down the columns, reading. Cornelius Welby, age 12, 1958. Marigold Hennessy, age 7, 1959. Sebastian Terry, age 14, 1959. Bridget O'Halloran, age 6, 1960. Halfway down the second column, there. Roisin Kavanaugh, age 12, 1960. Briar's hand went to her mouth. Her grandmother's name, carved into a wall 66 years ago, carved by a woman who had been dead for 62 years, carved before Briar's mother had been born, carved before Briar herself had been a thought in anybody's prayer. She touched the carved letters, Roisin. She traced them. She traced her grandmother's name with her finger, and then she put her forehead against the wall, and Briar Kavanaugh, who had not cried at her grandmother's funeral, who had not cried at the lawyer's office, who had not cried at the U-Haul, who had cried only once in the brass kettle when a stranger called her baby girl, Briar Kavanaugh cried. She cried for her grandmother at 12 years old, with swollen knuckles, with aching wrists, coming down those brass stairs for the first time, finding this hall, finding a teacher who saw her, finding a place where her hands could make music even though her hands hurt. She cried for the secret her grandmother had carried. She cried for the silence her grandmother had kept. She cried for everything Roisin had hidden from her and everything Roisin had given her, without ever saying why. Rhett did not speak. He stood at a distance. He gave her the room. After a long time, she lifted her head. She wiped her face. She turned around, and she saw the desk, a small walnut writing desk along the wall opposite the instruments, a green-shaded reading lamp, a single chair, a single envelope on the desk, precisely centered, sealed with red wax. Briar walked to the desk. She picked up the envelope. The wax had the same treble clef as the key. On the front of the envelope in the handwriting, Briar already knew were 5 words. To whoever finds this room. She broke the wax. She opened the envelope. She unfolded the letter. It was 3 pages long. She read it aloud because her voice needed to hear it, because the room needed to hear it, because Rhett needed to hear it, because somewhere in the room, her grandmother needed to hear it too. My name is Philomena Annette Ashby. I am writing this letter in October of 1964, 2 weeks before I expect to die. Rhett sat down on the harpsichord bench. He sat down very slowly. I am 66 years old. I was a concert pianist. I performed in 23 countries between 1928 and 1956. In May of 1956, the train I was riding from Vienna to Hamburg derailed in a thunderstorm. I survived. My hearing did not. I lost all hearing in my left ear and 93% of my hearing in my right ear. My concert career was over. Briar paused. She breathed. I returned to Millbrook Hollow, the town where I was born, in the autumn of 1956. I built this hall in the 18 months that followed. I built it with the proceeds of my European career. I built it because I had a thought. The thought was this: the world of music has space for only one kind of body, the young body, the healthy body, the body with 2 perfect hands and 2 perfect ears. But music does not belong to that body alone. Music belongs to every body that can feel a vibration. I knew this because I could no longer hear my own playing, but I could still feel it. I could feel it in the bones of my arms when I struck a chord. I could feel it in the floor under my feet when the chamber organ played. I could feel it in my chest when the strings of the harpsichord were plucked. The music had not left me. Only the easy way of hearing it had. Briar's voice had thickened. She kept reading. Between 1958 and today, I have taught 67 students. Every one of them was a child the standard conservatories had refused. The deaf, the blind, the children with arthritis, the children with damaged hands, the children who could not speak, the children whose minds did not move the way the world wanted minds to move. I taught them in this hall because the world above ground was not yet ready for them. I taught them with a method I developed myself, a method based on vibration, on geometry, on the body's own intelligence. I have written everything down. The manuscripts in those cabinets are the complete record of the method, every adapted fingering, every alternate notation, every exercise, every song. I composed 312 pieces of music to be played by children whose bodies would otherwise have been told they could not play. One of those children was Roisin Kavanaugh. Briar's voice broke. Rhett was crying silently. She forced herself to continue. Roisin was the best of them, not because she had the most natural ability, because she had the most courage. Her arthritis began at 12 and was advanced by 15. She wore splints to bed. She wept on cold mornings. She came to this hall every afternoon for 4 years, and she learned every adapted technique I knew, and she invented 3 more that I did not. I have left her name first among my heirs. If a descendant of Roisin Kavanagh ever finds this letter, please know that her teacher loved her. Her teacher believed in her. Her teacher is even now very proud." Briar stopped. She could not see the page. She wiped her eyes with her sleeve. She read the last paragraph. "There is one more thing you must know. The fire that will take this house from me in 2 weeks' time is not an accident. I have been threatened. The people who threaten me are not strangers. They are my own family. My sister Cordwainer has spent 5 years trying to have me declared incompetent. She believes my work is shameful. She believes my students bring disrepute upon the Ashby name. She has been writing letters. She has been hiring lawyers. She has been preparing to have me committed. I have refused her every overture. I have placed $5,000 in trust at Millbrook Hollow Bank under terms that no Ashby can break. The trust is for the restoration of this house and for music education for children who need it most. If you are reading this letter, then someone has opened this hall, and the trust is yours to honor. Please, please, let the music live. It is all I have to leave behind. Philomena Ashby, October the 2nd, 1964. The room was silent. The colored glass dome was silent. The 5 instruments were silent. The 67 names on the wall were silent. Briar set the letter down on the desk. She looked at Rhett. He looked at her. $5,000. His voice was rough, compounding for 62 years. Yeah, in a conservative trust with professional management. Yeah, Briar. Yeah, that number is going to be huge. The bank manager at Millbrook Hollow Bank was Lavinia Inglewood, 58 years old, iron gray hair, half-moon glasses on a beaded chain. She had been at the bank for 36 years. She had handled estates and trusts and small business loans and the occasional foreclosure. She had not, in her entire career, ever processed a request like the one Briar Kavanagh placed on her desk that Friday afternoon. Briar slid the original trust documents across the desk. Lavinia opened them. Lavinia closed them. Lavinia opened them again. She picked up her phone. She dialed without looking. "Margaret, I need you to pull file A-1964-7 from the secure archive. Yes, now, yes, right now, Margaret." She set the phone down. She looked at Briar. She did not speak for a full minute. "Miss Kavanagh, I have known about this trust account my entire career. The Ashby Trust. It is the longest-running unclaimed trust in the state of West Virginia, possibly in the entire region. I have personally signed off on its quarterly portfolio rebalancing for 36 years. I have never met a single human being who was a legal heir to it until today. How much is in it? Let me check the current valuation." She typed. She stopped typing. She removed her glasses. She cleaned them on a small velvet cloth. She put them back on. She typed once more. She looked up. "Miss Kavanagh, the principal was $5,000 in October of 1964. It was held in conservative instruments for the first 25 years. It transitioned to a diversified bond and equity portfolio in 1989. It has continued to grow in that portfolio for the past 37 years. The current valuation as of the close of business yesterday is $487,246.11. Briar did not respond. She could not respond. She could not feel her face. Rhett, who had insisted on coming with her, made a sound like he had been punched in the stomach. Lavinia waited. She waited the way bankers wait when they have just told a young woman she is no longer poor. Miss Kavanagh, there is something else you should know. What? There has been a person attempting to access this account for approximately 30 years, multiple attempts, some legal, some not legal, some bordering on harassment. He has filed 2 separate civil suits attempting to claim the trust on grounds of consanguinity. Both suits failed. He has hired 3 different probate attorneys over the years. He has even on one occasion attempted to bribe a junior trust officer at this bank. That officer is no longer employed here. Who? Are you certain you want to know? Yes. Lavinia Inglewood folded her hands on her desk. She looked Briar in the eye. Hollis Vandermeer. The name landed. The name landed, and Briar's stomach landed somewhere on the floor of Lavinia Inglewood's office. He is Philomena Ashby's grandnephew. He is the grandson of her sister Cordwainer Ashby Vandermeer, the same sister who tried to have Philomena committed, the same sister who, when Philomena died, attempted to claim this property and was blocked from doing so by Loretta Crenshaw and a recently filed will that nobody in the family knew existed. Cordwainer raised her grandchildren, including Hollis, to believe that this house, this trust, and your great-aunt's entire estate have been stolen from the Vandermeer family. He has spent his adult life believing this. He has not until this week ever been so close to claiming any of it. Briar's hand went to the gold cross around her neck. She gripped it. He's going to come for me. He has likely already started. What do I do? Miss Kavanagh. Lavinia took her glasses off again. She set them down. You do nothing illegal. You do nothing unkind. You do exactly what your great-aunt's will instructs you to do. You honor the trust. You restore the house. You teach music to children who need it most. And you let me handle the bank's side of this, because the Ashby Trust has been waiting for 62 years for the right person to walk through that door. And that person is not Hollis Vandermeer. That person is you. Briar nodded. She did not know what else to do. She nodded. He came that night. She knew he was coming before he came, the way a deer knows a storm before the clouds gather, the way an old woman knows the phone is going to ring before it rings. He drove up Hawthorne Lane at 7 in the evening in a black sedan. He stepped out of the car. He was not alone. Beside him was a woman in a dark blazer with a leather portfolio, the same woman from the courthouse, his lawyer. Briar opened the front door before they could knock. Miss Kavanagh Nicole. Mr. Vandermeer, may I come in? You may stand on the porch. He paused. The lawyer paused. He smiled. The smile did not reach his eyes. My associate has prepared an offer. I am not selling. You haven't heard the number. I don't need to. $300,000. I am not selling. Miss Kavanagh, you are 19 years old. You have no income. You have a condemned house and a trust fund that is going to be tied up in litigation for the next decade. I can make this go away today. Today. You can be at a conservatory in Pittsburgh by September. You can have the future your grandmother wanted for you. All you have to do is sign. Briar tilted her head. My grandmother. Yes, you don't know what my grandmother wanted for me. I think I know better than. You don't know her name. He stopped. Pardon. You don't know her name. You don't know what she taught me. You don't know how she died. You don't know what she left me. You don't know what is in that letter on the desk downstairs. And you don't know, Mr. Vandermeer, what my grandmother did in this house for 4 years between the ages of 12 and 16. So please, her voice was steady, please do not tell me what my grandmother wanted for me. His face went cold. Miss Kavanagh, Let me be clear with you. Please be. My family has reasons for wanting that house demolished. There are aspects of my great-aunt's activities that my family considers shameful. She was a deaf woman teaching damaged children to do something she herself could no longer do. It was the kind of thing my grandmother spent the last 25 years of her life trying to undo. I will not allow a 19-year-old girl to undo my grandmother's life's work. Briar did not blink. She did not blink. She looked at him for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was very, very quiet. "Good night, Mr. Vandermeer." She closed the door. She locked it. She slid the deadbolt. She walked back into the parlor, and she sat down on the floor in front of the cold fireplace, and she shook. She shook for 10 minutes. She shook until Aisling Brogan knocked on the back door with a covered casserole dish from her grandmother. She shook until Mercer Tilden came at 9 and made her drink tea. She shook until midnight when she finally got up off the parlor floor and walked up the stairs through the third-floor doorway, down the brass spiral staircase, and into the hall they had begun to call the conservatory. She turned on only the lamp at the writing desk. She sat down at the desk. She opened the drawer. Inside the drawer was a small leather-bound book. She had not opened it earlier. She had been too overwhelmed. She opened it now. The pages were filled with writing in code, numbers, letters, symbols, the careful, deliberate hand of Philomena Ashby, but rendered in cipher. A diary in cipher. Briar stared at it. Footsteps on the staircase. She turned. Aisling Brogan was coming down the spiral, in her pajamas, holding the casserole dish. "My grandma said I forgot to give you this." "Aisling." "What?" "Come here." The girl came. Briar pushed the open diary toward her. "You know math." "I know math." "Can you read this?" Aisling looked. Aisling tilted her head. Aisling pulled the lamp closer. Aisling sat down on the floor at Briar's feet. "It's a substitution cipher, maybe, plus a numeric overlay. Hold on." The 12-year-old took a pencil out of her pajama pocket. She started writing on the back of an old envelope. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. "I think I got it." "Read it." Aisling cleared her throat. She read in her steady, careful voice. Day 41. Roisin's third finger has stopped responding to standard exercises. I have devised an adaptation. The fingering position uses the thumb where the ring finger would normally be used. The wrist must remain perfectly level. The result is a hand position no conservatory would teach. But the result is also music, real music. Music that does not lie. Music that does not pretend the hand is something it is not. Briar gripped the edge of the desk. "Keep reading." Aisling kept reading. Day 42. Roisin played for an hour without pain today. She wept. I wept with her. I wept because she does not know what she is doing. She thinks she is learning piano. She is not learning piano. She is teaching me an entire language of the hand that I will spend the rest of my life writing down. Roisin Kavanagh, 12 years old, is the best music teacher I have ever encountered. She does not know it yet. Maybe one day she will. Briar's tears fell on the desk. They fell silently. They fell while a 12-year-old in pajamas read 65-year-old encoded diary entries aloud in a hidden hall under a Victorian mansion in a dying town in the West Virginia hills. The music had not died. It had only been hidden. And now Briar Kavanagh, 19 years old, was going to find every single page. She was going to translate every single one. She was going to publish them. She was going to teach what Philomena had taught. She was going to honor what her grandmother had carried in silence for 60 years. She was going to do this even if Hollis Vandermeer burned everything else she owned to the ground, because some things are worth what they cost. And this was worth all of it. Spring came late to Millbrook Hollow that year. It came in slow, hesitant, like a season that wasn't sure if it was welcome anymore. The maples on Hawthorne Lane stayed bare until the third week of April. The forsythia held its yellow breath until the first day of May, and the wisteria on the porch of number 14 waited. It waited the way the house had waited, for something to be worth waking up for. Briar woke up every morning at 5:30. She did not need an alarm anymore. The house woke her, the way the light moved across the parlor floor, the way the radiators ticked when Padraig fired up the new boiler, the way Aisling Brogan rang the front bell at exactly 6:15 on her way to school, every day, without fail. I brought you blueberries. You always bring me blueberries. My grandma says you don't eat enough. Your grandma's been telling everyone in town I don't eat enough, because you don't. The girl handed over a small basket, walked off the porch, turned around at the gate. Mama Eiley is bringing her this afternoon. She's nervous. Eiley or Mama? Both. Briar nodded. The girl left. The girl always left. And Briar always stood in the doorway watching her go, because Aisling Brogan was 12 years old and she walked like a woman who had lived a lifetime, and because every morning Briar thought that could have been me at 12 if anyone had paid attention. But somebody had paid attention. Roisin Kavanagh had paid attention. So now Briar was going to pay attention to everyone else. The work on the house had taken 3 months. 3 months of crews, 3 months of saws, 3 months of Mercer hauling lunch in a borrowed pickup, 3 months of Rhett Quincy climbing scaffolding with rolls of drafting paper under his arm and his hair always falling into his eyes, 3 months of Padraig Sweeney quietly delivering materials at cost and waving off her thanks like she'd insulted his mother. The roof was new, the electrical was new, the plumbing ran to all 3 floors. The tower had been restored to its original copper green. The wraparound porch had been rebuilt board by board. The paint was white with dark forest trim, exactly the colors in the 1948 photograph the library had loaned her. The wrought iron gate had been straightened, the Latin still arched across the top. Musica sonat quod, tempus frangit. Music heals what time has broken. Reverend Cassius Whitmore came on the first Sunday in March. He came in a black coat and a hat that he held against his chest as he walked up the path. He was 66 years old. He had buried half the town and married the other half and christened most of the babies. And when he reached the porch where Briar was waiting, he did not climb the steps right away. He looked up. He looked at the house. He looked at the tower against the gray morning sky. My mother used to walk past this house when she was a girl. His voice was thick. She told me Philomena used to play with the windows open in the summer. She said you could hear it from 2 streets over. She said it sounded like God was practicing. Would you bless it, Reverend? He swallowed. He climbed the steps. He took her hand. I would consider it the honor of my ministry. So they did it on a Saturday. 40 people came, then 42. Then by the time Reverend Cassius opened his small leather Bible, there were 68 people standing on the lawn of number 14. The whole town, or what was left of the whole town. Mercer in his Sunday suit, Padraig with his sleeves still rolled up because he had been fixing the porch railing an hour before. Lavinia Inglewood from the bank in a dress the color of a robin's egg. Aisling and her grandmother, the mailman, the librarian, the woman who ran the gas station, the man who fixed lawnmowers. Loretta Crenshaw stood at the back. She held her leather book against her chest. She did not say a word the entire service, but when Reverend Cassius prayed, she closed her eyes. She closed her eyes and she said, "Amen," in a voice so soft only the wind heard her, and the wind heard everything in that town. The first student came 2 days later. Aisling brought her. She came through the front door holding Aisling's hand, 8 years old, tiny, a pink coat, brown braids, eyes the size of dinner plates. Her mother stood behind her with her purse clutched against her stomach like a shield. "This is Ailey." Aisling spoke clearly. Her hands moved as she spoke. "She wants to learn piano. She can't hear." The mother said it like she was apologizing. Briar knelt down. She looked at Ailey. She did not look at the mother. "Hi, Ailey." The little girl watched Briar's lips. Briar smiled. Ailey did not smile back, but she also did not look away. "Mama," the mother's voice cracked. "Mama wants to know. The other teachers, they said she couldn't. They were wrong. She can't hear, miss." "I know. How can she?" "Come with me." Briar stood up. She held out her hand to Ailey. The little girl looked at her mother. Her mother looked at Briar. Briar nodded once, slow, the way she had learned to nod in this house, the way Philomena Ashby must have nodded 100 times in this house, the way that meant, "Trust me just for 1 minute, and I will show you something." Ailey took her hand. Briar led her to the door at the end of the 3rd-floor hallway, down the brass spiral staircase, down, 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 into the cool earth, into the conservatory. The lights came on automatically now. Rhett had wired them with motion sensors that winter. The chandelier above the colored glass dome bloomed first, then the floor lights along the perimeter, then the soft amber glow of the small lamps over each of the 5 instruments. The mother gasped. She had not seen it before. Nobody outside the work crew had seen it. Briar had wanted it to wait. She had wanted it to be ready. It was ready. The mother put her hand over her mouth. "Sweet Lord." Briar walked Ailey to the Steinway. She placed Ailey's small hand flat against the wood of the piano lid. She pressed her own hand on top of Ailey's. To hold it there, to keep it there, she lifted the fall board. She struck a single note, middle C. Ailey's eyes went wide, wide, because the note was not just a note. The note was a tremble that traveled up through the wood, through Ailey's small palm, up her arm, into her chest. The note had a body. The note had a place to live. Ailey felt it. Ailey felt music. For the first time in her life, her mother started to cry. She covered her face and she sat down on the floor of the conservatory, and she cried the way mothers cry in this country when their children get a chance they had stopped praying for. Ailey did not cry. Ailey pressed her hand harder against the piano lid. She looked up at Briar, and in a voice like wind through a screen door, in a voice that had not been used because nobody had given her a reason to use it, the little girl said, "Again." Briar's throat closed. She played the note again. She played it again. She played it again. 2 weeks later, Ailey played her first melody. She did not play it with her ears. She played it with her hands and her wrists and her chest. She played it the way Philomena Ashby had taught Roisin Kavanagh to play it 63 years before. She played it because somebody had finally written the music for hands that did not know they could remember. Word spread fast, the way news spreads in a small West Virginia town, the way water spreads under a door, quiet, steady, unstoppable. By the end of the first month, Breyer had 18 students, 18 children from across the Appalachian counties whose parents had been told no, 18 children whose parents had been told it could not be done, a boy with cerebral palsy whose left hand barely opened, a girl with juvenile arthritis, a set of twins on the autism spectrum who would not look anyone in the eye, a 9-year-old who had been blind since birth, a 17-year-old who had lost 3 fingers in a hay baler accident 2 summers before and had not played piano since, 18 children in a town of 1,847 people, and by April, the news had reached the state university. A professor of music education drove out one Tuesday afternoon. She wore cotton gloves to touch the manuscripts. She spent 6 hours in the conservatory. She read Philomena's letter 4 times. She wrote in a small notebook. She did not speak for most of the visit. When she left, she stood at the gate. She looked at Breyer. "Do you have any idea?" Her voice was unsteady. "Do you have any idea what your great-aunt invented down there?" "My great-aunt, Philomena. She wasn't my, maybe not by blood sweetheart, but by what?" The professor smiled with her whole face. "By legacy." She got in her car. She drove away. 3 weeks later, 2 more professors came. By May, there was talk of a research grant, a pilot program, a published edition of the manuscripts. By May, Breyer had a real foundation, a real name, a real address, a real future. And then came the fire. It was a Wednesday in early May. The dogwoods had finally bloomed. Aisling had finally taken off her winter coat. The conservatory was full of children every afternoon, and Breyer had not slept more than 5 hours in any single night for 3 weeks. She was tired. She was tired the way her grandmother used to be tired. The bone tired. The good tired. She was teaching Eileen's lesson when she smelled it. She thought it was the radiator. She thought it was a candle, until Aisling came running into the conservatory, white-faced and out of breath. "Breyer, Breyer, the shed. What about the... It's on fire." Breyer ran up the brass spiral staircase, through the 3rd floor, down, out the back door. The tool shed where Padraig had stored the reclaimed lumber, the tool shed full of original 1887 millwork that Rhett had been carefully cataloging for 2 months. The tool shed that contained the only surviving pieces of the original Victorian gingerbread trim that they were going to use to restore the 2nd floor balcony. The tool shed was a torch. The flames had eaten the roof. They had eaten the walls. They had eaten everything. Padraig was already there. So was Rhett. So was Mercer. Sirens wailed up Hawthorne Lane. Aisling pulled Eileen back from the heat. Eileen, who could not hear the crackle but could feel the heat on her face, started to cry. Breyer stood on the back lawn and watched her grandmother's chance burn. She did not cry. She still did not cry. Crying takes breath. Breyer had not breathed in 8 minutes. The fire chief came around the side of the house. He was a man Breyer had met once at the prayer service. He had a kind face and burnt cheeks and a hand that he placed on her shoulder. "It wasn't electrical, Miss Kavanaugh." "What was it?" "Gasoline. 2 cans. We found them in the lilac bushes." She looked at him. "Somebody did this. Somebody did this." Breyer turned around. She looked at the ruined shed. She looked at the smoke rising in a black column into the perfect blue West Virginia sky. She looked at the dogwoods. She thought of Hollis Vandermeer. The state police came that night. They asked questions. Breyer answered them. Padraig answered them. Rhett answered them. Hollis Vandermeer had an alibi. Of course he had an alibi. He had been at a charity gala in Charleston. 200 people had seen him. He had even given a toast. He had not lit the fire himself, but somebody had, and the somebody who had was not going to be found. That night, Briar sat alone on the porch steps. Mercer was beside her. He had a thermos of coffee that neither of them was drinking. The shed still smelled like smoke. She still had not cried. "Mercer!" "Yeah, baby girl. I don't think I can do this." Silence. "I think I made a mistake. I think I should have sold the house. I think I should have taken the money. I think I should have gone to school in Pittsburgh like Gran wanted. I think Briar. I think I'm too tired, Mercer. I think I'm too young. I think I'm Briar. I think Hollis is going to keep coming. I think he's going to keep coming until—" "Stop." She stopped. Mercer stood up. He walked to his truck. He came back with a cardboard box. It was old, beat up, tied with twine. He set it on the porch step beside her. "I was going to wait." "Wait for what?" "Wait until you were ready." "For what, Mercer?" "For what your grandmother left you. The thing she really left you." Briar looked at the box. It was the size of a microwave. The cardboard was soft at the corners. The twine had been tied and retied 100 times. The label on the top in her grandmother's careful handwriting said, "For when she finds the room." Briar's hands started to shake. "How did you—" "She gave it to me the summer before she died. She drove out here for the first time in 62 years. She sat in my coffee shop for 4 hours. She told me everything. She gave me this box. She made me promise." "Promise what?" "That if a girl with her eyes ever walked into my coffee shop, I would not give her this box until the night she was going to give up. She said that night would come. She said it always came. She said I would know when it came." He sat down again. "It's tonight, Briar." She opened the box. Inside were 62 envelopes. 62, tied in stacks, yellowed, some old, some new, some from the 1960s, some from last year, each one addressed in her grandmother's handwriting, each one addressed to the same person, to Philomena Ashby, Hawthorne Lane, Millbrook Hollow. Briar pulled out the top one. It was dated 3 months before her grandmother's stroke. It had never been mailed. She opened it. Inside was a letter, and folded inside the letter was a piece of sheet music, hand-drawn, handwritten, hand-fingered with the adapted notation Philomena had invented 65 years ago. The notation Briar now taught every day. The notation no one outside this house had ever seen. Briar opened another letter, another song, another letter, another song. 62 letters, 62 songs. Her grandmother had been composing for 60 years. Her grandmother had been writing to a woman who had been dead for 6 decades. Her grandmother had been writing to her teacher every Sunday afternoon for 60 years, the teacher who had given her the language, the teacher whose method she had carried in secret because the world her grandmother lived in had no place for a woman with arthritis who could not play in concert halls. Her grandmother had kept the fire alive, quietly, privately, faithfully. For 60 years, Briar held the letters against her chest, and finally, the thing that had been waiting since the day Roisin died, the thing that had been waiting since the lawyer's office, since Owen's smug face, since the U-Haul, since the courthouse, since Hollis Vandermeer, since the burn shed, since the long, long string of days when Briar had to be brave because nobody else was going to be brave for her. The thing broke. Briar Kavanaugh, 19 years old, sat on the porch of 14 Hawthorne Lane, and she cried. She cried so hard Mercer Tilden put his arms around her and held her like she was his own granddaughter. She cried for her grandmother, for her parents, for Philomena Ashby, for Ailey's mother on the conservatory floor, for every woman who had been told no, for every woman who had kept the fire anyway, for every woman who had written letters that were never going to be answered, for every woman who had written music in the dark and never told anyone because nobody had asked. She cried until the moon came up over the maples. She cried until Mercer was crying too, and when she could finally speak, she said, "I want to talk to Hollis." "What?" "I want to talk to Hollis Vandermeer. Tomorrow. Briar. He needs to hear this. Briar, that man tried to burn down your house." "I know. Briar. Mercer." She wiped her face with the back of her hand. "I'm going to invite him to the conservatory. I'm going to play for him. I'm going to play what my grandmother wrote. Because if I don't, this stops. If I don't, the fire wins. If I don't, Philomena dies all over again, and I am not going to let her die again." Mercer Tilden looked at her for a long time. Then he nodded. "Then I'll drive you to Charleston in the morning." Hollis Vandermeer lived in a 6-bedroom house on a hill outside the state capitol. The house had a circular drive, a fountain, a 4-car garage, 2 stone lions at the entrance. The maid answered the door. "He doesn't take unannounced visitors. Tell him Briar Kavanaugh is here. Tell him I drove 3 hours. He doesn't. Please." The maid hesitated. She closed the door. Briar stood on the porch. Mercer waited in the truck. The fountain ran. The lions did not move. A blackbird landed on one of them and looked at Briar and flew away. The door opened. Hollis Vandermeer was wearing a sweater the color of money. He looked older than he had at the courthouse. He looked tired. He did not speak. "Mr. Vandermeer, Miss Kavanaugh, will you come to the house with me? Today." "No. Please, no. There's something I need to play for you." He stared at her. "What?" "My grandmother wrote a song 62 years ago. She wrote it when she was 16 years old. It is the only song of hers I have ever played in public. I have not played it for anyone. I want you to be the first." "Why?" "Because the song is called 'For the Sister I Never Met,' and my grandmother wrote it about your grandmother." The color went out of Hollis Vandermeer's face, out of his hands, out of his lips. "You are lying." "I am not. My grandmother had a sister she despised. That much I knew, but nobody in our family was allowed to speak that woman's name. Then your grandmother spent the last 40 years of her life telling you a story about that sister that wasn't the whole truth, and my grandmother wrote a song trying to understand why." He did not speak for a full minute. He looked past Briar. He looked at the fountain. He looked at the stone lions. He looked at the gray West Virginia sky. "I will follow you." He drove behind Mercer's truck the whole way to Millbrook Hollow. He drove in silence. He drove in a car that probably cost more than the truck that had once been Briar's grandmother's car. He drove like a man who had been told for 60 years that he was the victim of a great injustice and was about to find out he had been the executioner the entire time. When they reached the house, he did not get out right away. Briar waited. Mercer waited. Hollis sat in his car for 10 minutes, his hands on the steering wheel, his eyes on the wrought iron gate, the Latin still arching over the top. Musica sonat, quod tempus frangit. Music heals what time has broken. He got out. He walked through the gate. He walked up the steps. The porch was solid now. The boards were tight. Briar's hands were beginning to feel like hands again, like hands that knew what they were for. She led him inside. She led him up the staircase. She led him to the 3rd floor. She led him through the door Aisling had once called the door at the end of the hallway. She led him down. down into the brass spiral staircase, down into the cool earth, down into the conservatory she had only known existed for 3 months and that this man's family had known about for a century. The lights came on as they descended. The colored glass dome bloomed above them. The lamps flicked on over the 5 instruments. The honor wall came into view, the wall with 67 names carved into it. 67 students Philomena had taught down here in the 6 years between the train accident and the fire. Hollis Vandermeer stopped halfway down the staircase. He gripped the brass railing. "What is this?" "This is what your great-aunt built." "How is this here?" "She built it after she lost her hearing. She built it with the money she had saved from European tours. She built it so children with bodies and minds the world had rejected could learn to make something beautiful." He kept walking. He could not stop himself. He stepped onto the polished floor. He turned in a slow circle. The Steinway, the Bösendorfer, the Bechstein, the 18th century French harpsichord, the chamber organ with its 28 copper pipes, the library cases full of 312 manuscripts in his great-aunt's hand, the honor wall. He walked to the honor wall. He read the names. His finger moved slowly down the columns. His finger stopped. His finger stopped on a name he had not expected, a name his great-aunt had carved into a wall in 1958. Albin Vandermeer, age 10, 1958. Hollis's hand started to shake. "This isn't possible." "It's possible." "This isn't. My father never—" "Your father took piano lessons from his aunt for 2 years, from the time he was 8 until the time he was 10, and then your grandmother forbade him. She told him Philomena was a sick woman with strange ideas. She told him forgetting was a kindness. She told him the family had reasons. So he forgot. He grew up and he forgot. He married, he had you, he never spoke of her again. But the boy you remember as your father," Breyer's voice was quiet, "that boy learned to love piano in this room, in this exact room. Before he forgot, he was allowed to love anything at all." Hollis Vandermeer put his hand against the wall. He put his forehead against the wall. And the man who had walked into the auction in a charcoal suit, the man who had tried to crush Breyer with $500 cash, the man whose hired arsonist had burned the tool shed, that man broke. He broke the way people break only when the lie they have lived for 60 years finally cracks open and shows them what was underneath. He cried into the wall of names. He cried for his father. He cried for an aunt he had never met. He cried for a grandmother who had carried bitterness like an inheritance and passed it down without ever realizing it was poison. Breyer walked to the Steinway. She sat down. She opened the fallboard. She placed her hands on the keys. The song her grandmother had written 62 years ago, the song that was never sent, the song that was never played, the song that had been waiting for 62 years for the right hands and the right room and the right person sitting on the floor weeping against a wall of names. The song was called "For the Sister I Never Met." Breyer played it. She played it for the woman who had taught her grandmother. She played it for the grandmother who had taught her. She played it for the children upstairs who were learning to remember things they did not know they had forgotten. She played it for the woman she had not become yet, but was becoming. She played it for the maples on Hawthorne Lane. She played it for the dogwoods. She played it for the man weeping on the floor of his own family's secret. When she finished, the conservatory was silent. Hollis Vandermeer had slid down the wall. He was sitting on the floor, his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. He did not speak. He did not need to. A week later, an envelope arrived at the foundation. plain white, no return address, postmarked Charleston. Inside was a cashier's check, $50,000, made out to the Ashby Kavanaugh Music Sanctuary. No letter, no note, only a signature on the memo line. For my father. The grand opening was on the first Saturday in June. The whole town came. The whole town brought folding chairs. The whole town brought casseroles and pies and pitchers of sweet tea. The professors from the State University came. Reverend Cassius came in his Sunday suit. Loretta Crenshaw came in a hat with a pheasant feather. They set up the chairs on the lawn first, because they had to, because the conservatory could only hold 120 people, and there were 300 who wanted in. Aisling Brogan stood at the front in a white dress. She had grown 2 inches that spring. She held Briar's grandmother's violin under her chin. She played the opening hymn. Then the children came, one by one. The twins who would not look at anyone played a duet on the upright in the parlor. The boy with cerebral palsy played a single-hand melody on the Bösendorfer. The girl with juvenile arthritis played a piece her grandmother had written in 1972 that nobody had ever played in public. The blind 9-year-old played a piece by ear, transposed on the spot, that the music professor said in her notebook later was an act of musical intelligence not previously documented. The 17-year-old with 7 fingers played the slowest, most painful, most magnificent thing Briar had ever heard. And finally, Eily in a yellow dress, Eily with her braids tied with yellow ribbons, Eily climbing onto the bench of the Steinway, with her small feet not quite reaching the floor. Her mother in the front row had her hands clamped over her own mouth. Briar knelt beside Eily. She placed Eily's hand on the wood of the piano. She nodded. Eily closed her eyes. She played the song she had composed herself. 8 years old, deaf since birth, composing on a piano she had learned to feel. She played for 2 minutes. When she finished, the room did not applaud, not at first. The room held its breath. The room held its breath the way the sky had held its breath the morning Roisin Kavanaugh died. Then Eily opened her eyes. She turned to her mother, and she said in her wind through a screen door voice, "Mama, did you feel it?" Her mother fell to her knees. The applause that came was the kind of applause that is also a wail, that is also a prayer, that is also a thank you to whatever God is left listening in a tired country in a tired century. Briar played last. She played the piece her grandmother had written the autumn before she left Millbrook Hollow forever. The piece was called Promise to the Girl Who Will Come. Briar had found it in the 7th envelope. She had been practicing it for 2 months. Roisin had written it on a Sunday afternoon in October 1964, 3 weeks after Philomena died in the fire, 2 weeks before Roisin packed her belongings and got on a bus headed north. The piece was a promise, a vow made by a 16-year-old girl with arthritic hands to a granddaughter who would not be born for 43 years. The vow was simple. I will not let what we built die. I will carry it, even if I have to carry it in silence, even if I have to carry it alone, even if nobody ever knows. And if you ever find me, granddaughter, if you ever come to this house, know that everything I did from the moment I left was for you. Briar played the piece. The afternoon sun came through the colored glass dome. The dome shed its light in shards of red and gold and blue and green across the floorboards, across the Steinway, across Briar's hands, across the faces of the people in the room who were old enough to remember a town that had once been bigger, People who had loved and lost and waited and prayed and held on. People who had taught their daughters to play. People who had carried fire. She finished. She lifted her hands from the keys. She rested her hands in her lap. She looked up at the dome. She looked at the shards of light. She thought of her grandmother. She thought, Gran, I made it home. That night, after everyone was gone, Briar sat on the porch. The cicadas had started. The first cicadas of June. The dogwoods were past their peak. The maples were full and green. The wisteria had finally climbed all the way to the second story. Aisling Brogan came up the path. She sat down beside Briar. She did not speak for a long time. Then she said, Ailey asked if she could come every day this summer. Of course she can. My grandma asked if I could come every day too. Of course you can. My grandma asked if she could come. Briar laughed. The laugh surprised her. Of course she can. Mercer came up the porch with a tray, 3 cups of coffee. He set them down. He sat beside Briar. Rhett Quincy came up from the gate. He had been back at the State University most of the spring, but he came home on weekends. He came home with rolls of drawings under his arm. He came home with calculations for the second-floor restoration he wanted to start in the fall. He came home with his hair always falling into his eyes. He sat on the steps below Briar. He looked up at her. He smiled. She smiled back. Podrick Sweeney walked by on the sidewalk and tipped his cap. Lavinia Inglewood waved from across the street. Reverend Cassius drove past slowly. He honked once, twice. He kept driving. The town breathed around them. The town breathed the way the house breathed. Aisling looked up at the 3rd floor of the Victorian. The colored glass dome was lit from underneath now, a soft, warm glow that spilled into the summer night, a glow that could be seen from the bottom of Hawthorne Lane, a glow that Mercer said could be seen from his bedroom window above the brass kettle 4 streets over. Briar, yeah, baby. Do you think Gran can hear? Briar looked at the dome. She thought of her grandmother at 16 climbing these steps for the first time. She thought of her grandmother at 78 dying in a small bedroom in Hickory Ridge. She thought of the box of 62 letters and 62 songs and a promise made in the autumn of 1964. She thought of Philomena Ashby, who had lost her hearing and found her purpose. She thought of Ailey, who had never had hearing and had found something better. She put her arm around Aisling Brogan. She pulled her close. She kissed the top of her red head. She always hears baby girl. The house breathed around them. The house had been waiting. The house had finally been found. And somewhere in the cool earth beneath them, 67 names carved into a wall by a deaf woman in 1962 kept watch over the children who would never know her name and would carry her music anyway. Music heals what time has broken. It always did. It always will.